Yes, I did see the Demon Slayer Hashira arc early, but that doesn't mean this video has any spoilers, because when I show you this picture of Tanjiro eating while recovering, it could be from literally any episode throughout the entire series. So today I'm going to be making the entire Demon Slayer recovery meal. This is the meal that Tanjiro eats after the events of the Swordsmith Village arc. It includes red bean buns and 2 types of dango. One of them with soy sauce and one a mitarashi, which is a sweet salty version. We're gonna make this entire feast right now. And I want to say thank you to my patrons for sponsoring this video. If you want to be cool like Greg and join our Patreon community, you can go down to the description below and join up. The patrons honestly make this happen. Now there is an order of operations for making this because some of the stuff can sit at room temperature, but some of it can't. Namely our dough and our red bean buns. So I have to make those first, starting off with the dough. Into a large bowl, I'm adding in, actually it shouldn't even go into here because we're still gonna need to transfer this to, that's what we're doing. Now to make the dough for the red bean buns, I am gonna be using a stand mixer, but if you don't have a stand mixer, you can just use a regular bowl. Into my bowl, I have 2 ounces of lightly warmed water. I put this in the microwave for about 15 seconds. To this, I'm adding in 1 teaspoon of dry yeast. Throw that right into your water, along with about 1/4 teaspoon of sugar. You want the sugar to be in there with the yeast so it feeds the yeast. Take a fork and give this a nice mix just to make sure that the yeast is fully saturated with the water. Now this mixture needs to sit for like 10 minutes. While the mixture is soaking, we have to make our homemade red bean paste. You can also just buy canned stuff. I find it to be a little bit sweet, so we made our own. And here's how I made it with the help of Past Me. Take it away, Paul.
The reason why I had sous chef Paul help me out is because we actually need to soak these red beans overnight, so this way I can cook them properly. If you don't soak your beans, it's going to take way too long to cook them. This is good practice for any dried beans that you use, especially if you're trying to use them the same day. So after draining the beans, I place them into a medium-sized pot, a sprinkle of salt, followed by filling this thing up with water. This gets cooked for around 3 hours until those beans are totally soft. I'm then draining out all of that good bean juice that you don't really need, making sure it is completely strained out. You don't really want too much water because it makes your life harder later. Now this part is optional, but you can push the beans through a nice sieve. This way you get a really smooth puree. Alternatively, if you don't feel like doing this, honestly, just put it into a nice high-powered blender and blend it until it is as smooth as you can get. You can see what the remnants look like after dropping them all over the cutting board, and we really just want what's left in this pot. This is the stuff that came through the strainer.
I actually don't like my red bean to be too sweet, so I'm only starting with 1 tablespoon of sugar, or just about 1 tablespoon of sugar, but you can adjust the sweetness. The thing with getting the canned red bean is that it has a ton of sugar in it because it also acts as a preservative, so this way you can adjust the sugar and make it as sweet as you want.
Alternatively, you can sweeten it with something like agave or honey if you really don't want to use sugar. But once you put your sweetener of choice into the bean, place this back onto the stove, and this has to cook down for just a few minutes. This does a couple of things. It helps the sugar completely emulsify with the beans, but it also helps remove any excess moisture from the bean puree. Remember what I said earlier, if you have too much liquid, it's going to be harder to put this into the steam buns. Once this thing is nice and cooked, place this onto a plate to cool down, and we can use this later on today, or you can use it the next day if you seal it well. Now that my sous chef is done, I don't know what he's doing here.
Red bean paste is honestly not too difficult to make, especially if you don't want to go through the process of making it nice and smooth. You can just blend it up. And once you have it, it freezes really, really well too. Gandalf, you are so loud, sir. I'm gonna take a few nice spoonfuls of this to get as many equal portions as I can. We also don't want to make them too big, otherwise they will not be enveloped by the dough later. Admittedly, my red bean paste is a little more wet than I think I would like it, but I'm just gonna roll with it and hope for the best. Now here's something I like to do that isn't super necessary, but because these are a little wet, I do want to dry them out and sweeten them up a little bit more. I'm gonna take just a touch of powdered sugar, place it onto my palm, and then take 1 dollop of the red bean and place it right onto that and just kind of roll it around a little bit. The powdered sugar should dry it out slightly, but also allow me to roll them into better balls. I'm gonna repeat the process for all of these. One last thing is I'll take some powdered sugar, I'll put it into my strainer, and I'll just lightly dust the top of these. It's gonna dry them out just a little bit so it's easier to work with. You're not really gonna have them like coated with sugar, but it's just enough to help it later. Now these just can sit out at room temperature until you're ready to use them. You can cover them if you're worried about them drying out, but since mine are so wet, I'm not worried about it. Now after my yeast and water has rested for about 10 to 15 minutes, I'm gonna take About 5.5 ounces of warmed milk. I did the same thing through the microwave for about 15 seconds just to warm it up a little bit, and then I'm pouring this into my yeast mixture and gently stirring it around. Now to my liquids, I'm adding in 185 grams of all-purpose flour directly on top of my milk, yeast, and water, 1 teaspoon worth of salt right on top, and then 3 tablespoons of powdered sugar to sweeten everything up. I'm going to give this a gentle mix with my fork just before I put the dough hook attachment in there, just so this way it doesn't have to work as hard. Once it gets pretty crumbly, this is where we can throw it onto the stand mixer. Hoots! Remember, again, if you don't have a stand mixer, instead of mixing it for a few minutes onto this, you can do everything by hand in a large bowl. Lock and load your bowl, throw the dough hook attachment into this, bring it up. We're gonna mix this for about 5 minutes. What I'm looking for is for the dough to start coming free of the sides of the bowl. Now after about 5 minutes, our dough is done. It's a small little guy and it should be nice and smooth, really malleable. It should do the earlobe test, which is where you pinch a piece of the dough and it should flop around like an earlobe. But this still has to rest. So I'm gonna shape this just into a small ball. This way it kind of rises evenly. Press it in between your fingers, creating your beautiful little dough ball. And then we're gonna place this just back into our bowl. Nothing crazy here. You will still need the dough hook later, so just place that wherever it's convenient and get this out of your way for now. Now this does need to rest for the hour, so I'm just gonna take a plate, put it on top, and just set this to the side. And since it's really cold in the house, I'm actually going to put it over by the stove, so this way maybe it gets any residual heat from like the microwave or something, but we're just looking to double this in size. While that dough is resting, I'm gonna start making all the stuff I need for the dango, and the dango is relatively easy. The two types are isobe dango, which is a dango that is usually prepared and then cooked in a pan with like a soy sauce glaze, and the second one we're gonna be making mitarashi dango. That one is more sweet savory than it is salty sweet, if that it's kind of the same thing. It's not the same thing, but it's very similar. Now for the mitarashi sauce, I need 6 ounces of water, 2 ounces of mirin, 2 ounces of soy sauce, 2 tablespoons of sugar, and then I will need 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. This is gonna help thicken it all up. But we can't add the cornstarch directly in here because it clumps up, so we're gonna add it to our little liquid measuring cup here, and then I'm gonna add water to this to make our slurry. This way it doesn't clump up at all. Grab your cooking apparatus, hopefully there's gas, there is gas, okay. Now all I need to do is bring this to a simmer to dissolve all of the sugar. This honestly takes almost no time at all. This has been on here for about maybe 30 seconds, and that sugar looks like it's pretty much gone. Now once this comes up to a simmer, this is when I can add my cornstarch. When you add your cornstarch slurry, you wanna add it in pretty slowly so this way it can incorporate properly, and cornstarch only activates by boiling. So you wanna make sure that this comes up back to a boil so you know exactly how thick it's going to be. It will also thicken up once it cools down, so keep that in mind. As soon as I add the cornstarch, you can really start to see it thicken up. It should be very, very saucy. The reason for this is because when we dip the dango into here, it should fully coat it. You don't want any of that to fall off. Now let's come up to a nice simmer. This is what you want your sauce to look like. Look at how thick and rich that is. That's the consistency you want. Now this can actually just sit in the pot until we're ready to use it. And luckily, dango is really easy to make. I have 3/4 cups of dango or mochi flour. I kind of have a combination of both because admittedly, I was running low and I forgot to buy some. So this is a combination of mochi flour and dango flour. We're adding in that straight to our bowl with just a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, just enough to give it a little bit of seasoning. You can alternatively add sugar to this, but I like mine with salt. The reason for that is because we're gonna have some savory and sweet elements later. Now you also will need some very, very hot water. I actually put this to boil in my kettle and I'm measuring out about a 1/2 cup of water. Now grab yourself some chopsticks, or you can also do this with a whisk, but chopsticks tend to be a little bit easier to move around this flour. I'm going to slowly add in my water, probably like 2 to 3 parts at a time, while stirring the water into this flour. This way it gets nice and crumbly, but also this way we can make it to where we don't add our water in too fast. Sometimes you may need less water, sometimes more, so I like to just go slow and low. There's the rest of my water in there, and now I'm gonna continue to mix this with my chopsticks. Again, I may need a touch more water, but that's gonna be determining on whether or not I can actually form this into a dough. So this is still pretty crumbly. You can see when I press it together, it doesn't come together too well. So I want to see if this is fully hydrated with the water that I had. And if it crumbles apart, you know you need just a little more water. So I'm just gonna add in just a touch more, see what this looks like. We don't want to go overboard. I'm probably adding in a half a teaspoon of water at a time. I think we're almost there. You can see how it's starting to really clump up, and it's actually pretty hard to move around with the chopsticks now. This is where I'm gonna give it another test with just mixing it by hand. This looks really, really nice. You can see I can kind of freely move it around without touching it too much, and it can get really nice and shiny, but I'm gonna continue to mix this by hand for another 2 or 3 minutes just to make sure all of that flour is fully hydrated. Now, I've been mixing this in the bowl for a few minutes, but I think I really need to put this onto the cutting board to really get some work into it. I'm just gonna press this until it doesn't feel like warm anymore. I want it to be cool to the touch. It's still a little bit warm from the water, so I'm just gonna work this on the cutting board just a little bit, scrape off anything that's on that bottom right there. And now I can actually try to start forming some dango balls. Gonna roll it out into one of those little Play-Doh snakes you made as a kid. Everybody made those. Then I'm using a bench scraper, but you can just use like a knife or whatever. You can just pull these apart by your hand, tuck this in a little bit. And now I'm gonna try to get as many even pieces as possible. So I'm gonna cut this in half because we do have 2 different versions. Put 1/2 to the side and then cut this in half again and in half again. I think we'll do 4 pieces. I think that'll be a good size because then you get a nice sized dango like this. Gonna just gently roll this together. I'm really bad at making balls with my hands. There we go, that's pretty decent. Place that to the side. The reason why I cut these in half and splitting these up is because one version of the dango actually has to be a little more flat than the other. Now we have 4 on this side for the mitarashi, and then we're gonna cut this more or less the same way. Granted, each skewer should get 3 or 5 for luck, but maybe I don't have that much faith in the demon slayers. Gonna roll these the same way, but then we're gonna give those a press in just a second. Now once these 4 on this side are formed, this is where we put one ball in front of us, we take the palm of our hand, and we gently press them down. This way they become almost like a disc instead of a full ball. I'm gonna tuck these in as well, so this way we kind of get like a squared off shape. And there's one version of our dango. I'm gonna repeat the process with these, and then these are ready to cook. And now since I did think ahead, I have water ready to boil these bad boys. Once the water is to a boil, this is where we just drop our dango straight in. Now we do have to cook these for probably 7 to 8 minutes, but what we're really looking for is for these to float to the surface. And then once they start floating, that's where we cook them for an additional 2 to 3 minutes, and then they're done. A big thing with dango though is they like to stick to the bottom. So initially when you put these in, make sure you do move that water around just so they don't stick to the bottom of your pot. Now I'm gonna let these boil until they start floating. My dango have been floating to the surface of my pot for about 3 or 4 minutes. I'm gonna pull these out and place these directly into an ice bath. Now, you don't necessarily have to put these in an ice bath, but I like that they make it quicker to handle. You can just serve these right out of here after they've rested at room temperature for a little bit, but I like the ice bath. We can get rid of all this water, we don't need it anymore, but there is still one thing we have to do. One of the dango actually gets a little bit of seaweed. You can skip this step if you don't care for the flavor of seaweed. I actually really enjoy it, so I'm still going to include it. I'm taking one of my nori sheets. This is just a traditional dried piece of nori you would find on sushi, and I'm cutting it along the perforated line to make sure it's as even as I can get it. And then once I have a nice strip, this is where I'm gonna cut them into small squares that I think are going to fit on the flat dango that we made. Does that make sense? Yeah, you'll see in a second. That's it. And then you can keep the rest of this for whatever you wanna use. You just eat it, it's not bad. Probably needs to be toasted a little bit, a little chewy. But now our seaweed squares are ready to put onto our flat dango. Now grab yourself a plate, put a little bit of water onto the plate itself so they don't stick. We're gonna fish our dango out of our bowl of water here. And now these are all ready to skewer. Since we're not doing anything too crazy with the dango that are in the shape of the balls, because this is for the mitarashi, I'm just gonna skewer them now. One thing is I didn't soak my skewers because we're pretty much gonna be eating these in the next like hour or so. So we don't really need to soak these. Boom, there's our mitarashi prep. This is gonna get dunked into that in like an hour. So we're just gonna keep it here. Now, admittedly, I've never made these flat style of dango before, so I am gonna wing it just a little bit. Gonna place my square of seaweed right on top of each of these sides. And once these are on here, the surface does need to be still wet to do this, otherwise it won't stick. I guess just try to skewer them now. They're super hard to do compared to the ball because it's such a flat surface. Come on. Oh God, it's smushing. It kinda didn't, oh, it's not holding up at all. Okay, we're gonna not put it on a skewer. Instead, I'm gonna leave these just like this until we're ready to finish plating this entire thing up, which is gonna be in like 2 hours, because that dough needs more time. Now this dough has actually been sitting over on the stove where it's a little bit warmer for an hour and a half. It's pretty cold in the house, so I had to create a warmer environment for it, but it's looking pretty decent. Now, before we work with it, we do have to actually get some of the air out of it. That's all I'm gonna do with this. A little bit of flour right on the cutting board so it doesn't stick. Take your beautiful, beautiful dough ball, place that right onto there. And then I'm just gonna work this for another couple of minutes just to make sure I get all the air out of it. We don't want too much air in here. We could put it back into the mixer like I mentioned earlier about keeping the dough hook, but this is fine. We're just gonna do this instead. I take that back. I'm gonna put it back into the bowl. I'm lazy today. This is bad. That's it, not too long. We really only wanted a couple of minutes on this. Now the next thing to do is get some equal portions out of our dough. Easiest way to do this is to roll it back into a ball, and then we're gonna cut the dough into equal portions. I kinda wanna try to get 7, but I think that's a weird number, so we're gonna do 7 because that's how much red bean paste I was able to portion out. So let's see how much this weighs. So our dough weighs 320 grams. If we divide 320 by 7, we should get about 45 grams per ball. I'm just portioning these out as evenly as I can. If some of them are over or under by a few grams, it doesn't make that big of a difference, but the problem is when you're getting like 10 or 15 grams over or under, then you're gonna have a problem. There, 7 equal-ish portions. Now to make sure that these also are even when we go to roll them out, we're going to roll these into nice little balls as well. Of course, this is a very slippery surface. I'll take a little bit of water, put that down. This way your dough ball will stick to the surface a little bit better. There, that's good. It's decent enough, little dough ball. Now we're gonna repeat the process with all of these. Now once we have all of these ready to go, we're going to work from the first one down. The reason is because the first one has just a little bit more time to relax, so this way it rolls out a bit easier. Now you are gonna need a small dowel or rolling pin for this next part, and if you don't, you can use a regular rolling pin. It's just a little bit harder. You can also shape these by hand. Let me show you how to do one by hand. I like to start by pinching the outside of the ball and making sure that I give a little bit of a dimple to the center. This way, when we go to crimp it up, you have an even distribution of dough from the top and the bottom. You just keep doing this until you get it to around 4 inches in diameter or so. It could be a little bit bigger, but then the filling might look a little empty. Once I'm at this stage though, I do like to use my rolling pin because I'm not very good at the hand method, and I'll just sit here forever. So you'll wanna roll out from the middle to the outside and continue to do this and get it as even as you can. You don't have to do this. I'm gonna measure it so I can see how close I am. That's actually about 4 inches. So we're good. We're gonna make them all about this size. And that is what we're looking for. Little dimple in the center, we can see that, and then your little flaps at the end. And now we're just gonna do this with all of this. Ready? And there, my friends, is our 7 dough balls. Now what I didn't realize or remember is that I actually only have 6 pieces of our red bean. That's fine. We're just gonna make 6 and maybe just steam this one and eat it delightfully. Now we're gonna take one of our pieces of dough, and then to not get our hands super dirty, I'm gonna use a spoon and I'm going to take the scoop, place it right into the center here. These were also in the fridge because this did take quite a bit of time. I know I said I could leave it out, but that didn't happen. And I'm going to start folding the dough over in on itself, making a beautiful little dough ball. Just try your best here. You wanna make sure that the dough gets pinched together so this way none of the red bean can really come through. And then once you get it to this point, this is where I kind of like to crimp the whole thing. Then you give it a little twist and we're gonna tuck it in. And this is the bottom of our bun. You can see that there's a bunch of creasing on it. I'm going to flip this over and we're gonna let this rest like this. This is how they're actually going to be steamed, this side up. Now I'm gonna repeat the process and fill all of these. Ready? And there it is. I actually was able to make 7 by siphoning from a few of them to make a 7th one. But now here comes the part that I hate the most, and that's cooking them. We are gonna need some squares of parchment paper. I had pre-cut these because I try to be prepared, and I'm gonna take each of these and place it onto the parchment. You do want the parchment to be a little bit bigger than the ball itself so it has some room to steam and grow. Now with steam buns, it's very important that we proof these. These have to proof over some warm water for about 30 minutes to relax the dough. If we don't relax the dough, they're not going to rise very well. And I've actually had that happen before. And I also don't know if I can fit 7, let's try to fit 4 in here. I think we can get away with 4 on this one, as long as there's a little bit of room in between. So you can see there's room on the outside of each dough ball and between each one. And then this top side is going to go right on here. We're gonna put the other 3 right onto this. Now, once I have these on here, we have to put this on a pot of water. I preheated a giant pot of water ahead of time, so this way I can begin proofing them, because once these go onto this pot, we cannot open this thing, otherwise they can deflate. Sometimes I get too excited and I open it up to look at them, and then everything just ends up deflating. So with this on here and the lid going on, we're going to proof these like this off of the heat for 30 minutes, and then we will cook them. Now these have been proofing for 30 minutes. This is where I crank on the heat to high. And now a new timer starts for 15 minutes, then it rests for 5, and hopefully we can unveil them. Now, while the steam buns are steaming over there on the stove, we can actually finish the dango. I'm gonna start off with the flat dango, or I believe it's the isobe dango. I've had my dango sitting at room temp this whole time, and that's okay. When I was in Japan, dango was just kind of sitting out, wrapped really well. This is a really big pan for this. Now to make this, I'm taking just 1 spoon of the mitarashi sauce that we have, because it is pretty sweet, and then I'm adding just about an equal portion of soy sauce directly to this. So if you're using about 2 tablespoons of the mitarashi, add 2 tablespoons of soy sauce. Give this a quick stir together, and then all we need to do, all right, we don't want it this hot, chill out, don't freak out. Have this over a medium heat, and then we're going to drop our square dango directly into the sauce. Now I'm gonna cook it like this for just a couple of minutes until it starts to absorb some of that sauce, and it really doesn't need much time at all. We're really just rewarming everything. Also keep in mind, this sauce is not traditional. I'm doing it this way because we already made mitarashi sauce. Normally it would just be soy sauce, water, and maybe like a touch of sugar. While this is cooking, you can grab yourself a brush and lightly brush the top of each of these. The one problem with this sauce is that it can evaporate very quickly, and so it just thickens up and caramelizes very quickly. So to prevent that from happening too fast, I'm gonna introduce a little more water. Really just need a splash of water into the center there, just to make sure that the sauce doesn't overcook yet. I'm feeling kind of frisky, so I'm gonna flip these too. You know what also works really, really well here is if you make potato mochi and then do this. So instead of using dango flour to make this style, you can use mashed potato with a little bit of mochi flour in it, and then cook it the same way, and you get this really nice, chewy, cheesy potato if you throw some cheese in there. Oh, I'm gonna give this one more flip, and these are pretty much ready to go. We're just gonna leave them in the pan, so this way we can plate them up with a little bit of extra sauce, you know, why not? The sauce is there, it's already made. And the last thing we have to do is just reheat our mitarashi sauce. Now to finish this off, I'm just heating up the mitarashi sauce to loosen it up, because it does thicken up quite a bit once it cools down. So I'm making sure it's just loose enough to where I can dip those dango into here, and then we can plate this up. It's been, admittedly, almost 4 hours of cooking to make this today. Did not think it was gonna take that long. Sauce is ready, literally seconds. Now for the mitarashi, all we're doing is we're dipping it directly into the sauce. And the easiest way, honestly, is just kind of roll it around there, get it nice. Oh God, that's all over that. That's fine. Normally this would be deep enough to where you can dunk the whole thing, but since that can't really happen with this, we're just gonna do our best. What we're also gonna do is be smart and use a spoon. Take the spoon and just cover the entire skewer with sauce. Now this loaded dango goes right onto the plate. We're just gonna put it right there where we made a mess earlier. And honestly, what I like to do is put a little more sauce right on top. And normally the dango are either grilled or barbecued or torched before dipping. And since I admittedly forgot, we're gonna caramelize some of the topping right on this. It's just gonna crystallize the sugars just a little bit. Just a quick pass and that's enough. And then we have the isobe dango. I'm putting those right next to the mitarashi. I'm gonna kind of stack them a little bit since it's not on a skewer, just to make it look pretty. And because the isobe is a little more savory than the mitarashi, I'm gonna put just a bit of sesame seed right on top. But now, my friends, this was the easy part. We still have to see if those buns worked. You ready? I'm not ready. I'm never ready for this part. Bring the whole thing over. This has been resting for about 7 or 8 minutes now, a little bit longer than normal, but that should be okay. All right, here we go. Oh, okay. Those look good. I think those are good. They didn't collapse. Those look pretty nice and fluffy. I'm really, oh my, how the bottom ones look. Let's go, it worked. Genuinely happy. I've had very hard times with this style before, and I'm so glad it looks like it worked. Look at that, looks gorgeous. Nice and plump, Little bit of bubbling on there. Oh, easily peels off the paper. Oh, yes. We're just gonna stack 3, just like that. I think that's good. And there it is, guys. After 4 hours of making dango and these red bean buns, this is ready to eat. Granted, this would be easier if these were on a stick, admittedly. So I'm going to poke one of these dango and get it off the plate. This is the sobe dango, the saltier one. I'm gonna start with this one. Cheers. I have never had that before, and it's delightful. It's nice and salty. There's just a touch of sweetness on it, nice and chewy as well. And then the sesame seeds give that nice toastiness. That is delicious. Now for one of my favorites, mitarashi dango. I've made this numerous times, and most recently on my live stream, Cooking 101. Cheers. Chewier, sweeter, and admittedly, not as sweet as I've normally had it. My normal recipe adds brown sugar, but I tried it with just regular sugar this time, and I think I like the brown sugar version better. Still really good, would add brown sugar too. But now, the final frontier, the red bean bun. Cheers. Oh, it's so fluffy. You can see those beautiful layers on the inside. It proofed perfectly. Wow, I think these are honestly, this is some of the best buns I've ever made. I actually haven't had that much success with red bean buns before, or any kind of buns like this. This has a really nice, like fluffy texture. Look at that. Look how nice and airy that is on the inside. Oh, that makes me so happy. Admittedly, the red bean is a little wet, so it kind of gets lost on the inside, but the bun itself is fantastic. If you want to see me train like Uzui from Demon Slayer, click or tap right here, and a special thank you to my patrons for sponsoring today's video. If you want to support the channel directly, check us out at the Patreon link down below. Seriously, everything that you guys do over there really helps us sustain the channel and let us continue to do what we do. My name is CHEFPK, and remember, keep playing with your food.